So hello everyone and welcome to the next installment of Let's Talk Horses, a podcast about, you guessed it, horses. My
Wait,
special
what?
guest today,
Horses, really?
yeah, I
I thought
know,
we were here to talk about possums and
the cat is
cats.
out of the bag. My very special guest I'm so excited about because we always have a hoot of a time when we get together. I love hanging out with you, but I just want to quickly have a little intro of so this is Christopher Hughes. He is an access consciousness facilitator. He heads up a specialty in access called Right Voice for You, which is all about finding you and your voice in this world. He's also talking a lot these days on his own podcast called Between the Sheets about sex, basically, about all forms and how that shows up in people's worlds. So I'm so honored to have you here, Mr. Christopher Hughes.
Hello, my dear. Thank you for having me. It is an honor. I love you and I love horses, so why not? But if you said we're going to have a hoot, shouldn't we be talking about owls?
Well, we can talk about ours. Let's see what shows up. Let's see what happens. But, even with that intro talking about all of these amazing things you create in the world, like I'd love to weave in how do horses even have an impact, or how do they show up in your world in order to contribute in that way? But before we get there, the first question I love to ask my guest, if they've not been on my podcast before, is how did horses come into your life?
Okay, cool. Well, I grew up in a part of Canada that is probably one of the more rural parts of Canada. And even though I was a city boy, so to speak, the cities where I grew up, they're pretty small. We still always had sort of people with farms or connection to farms or a history of our family having had a farm, and you would be introduced to horses one way or another. But it wasn't until quite a bit later in life that I actually got on a horse to ride, more than like a super broken trail horse that just like was almost on a string. It knew the road and it would do whatever.
Yeah.
I did a few of those trail rides as a kid, but it wasn't until meeting our common friend, there's nothing common about him, but our mutual friend, Mr. Gary Douglas, that I got on a horse and was like, oh wow, this is different. Because I mean, like I said, I grew up around farms and farm horses. Where I grew up, there were big horses, like big work horses, like Clydesdales and massive,
Yep.
yeah. And they were really quite. For most of my childhood, I think I saw them as quite intimidating beasts. Whenever I saw them, I have a memory of being a really little kid and being in a paddock and kind of being like off with the fairies a little bit, and I was behind this Clydesdale, and I turned my head at just the right time to see its hoof go so close to my face that if it had clocked me, I probably would have died. Um, that's my earliest memory of a horse.
Well, and they have such big hooves. Like their hooves are like dinner plates. They're freaking
Yeah,
massive. They're like
yeah,
so big.
giant.
And so fast forward a little bit to now, you now have a horse in Costa Rica, whom I hear you talk about a lot and I know is a huge part of your life. So maybe how did you come to sort of get to that? Did you ever think you would own a horse, A? And B, did you ever think you would own a freaking horse in Costa Rica?
No. Okay, but we got to rewind, because this is actually
Okay.
my second horse in Costa Rica.
Yes.
So I had a horse in Costa Rica who I kind of bought by accident. I wanted to ride in the morning. There was a group in Costa Rica. We were staying at this resort, and they had horse riding there. And there was a group going in the morning, and it was like you and Simone, our mutual friend, Gary, our mutual friend, Dana, our mutual friend, and I wanted to come along. Your brother Brendan was there, and I wanted to come along. And I said to Gary, "Hey, is there a horse I could ride? Could you suggest one for me at my level of expertise?" And he said, "Yeah, you should ride Nawal." And I went, "Okay." And getting on that horse, I just went, oh, I love this boy. He's so
Love.
sweet. Love at first sight. And he liked me, I liked him. It was really easy. Um, And even though I was only going to Costa Rica a couple times a year, I was like, it's worth it for me to pay for his boarding and his food, and know that every time that I'm here, he's mine to ride. Well, then one day I got the call that Noel had colic. And for those of you who know anything about horses and horse physiology, they can't really vomit. So when they get something with their stomach, colic can actually be fatal. And in this case, it was. I got the call saying, hey, he's sick. Can we call a vet? And I went, absolutely. And in 30 minutes later, I got the call saying, too late, he's gone.
Too late. Yeah.
Yeah, which was rough. And so I went, I'm not doing that again. I'm not buying another horse in Costa Rica. I'm not buying another horse, period. That was really hard. That was emotional. For me, loss of people and things hits me particularly hard. I'm a bit of a softie that way. Like,
Totally.
yes, and with an animal, it's different. It's like it's a totally different thing. Anyone out there? I was speaking with a colleague who works at our antique shop yesterday, and she had for 20 some odd years a cross pug French bulldog,
Yep.
and it just died. And for that breed to live that long is amazing. But she was not herself, and I was like, girl, I get you. Go home if you need to. Grief is real especially when it comes to animals, because what they contribute so different. But I digress, and my story gets long. I said no more horses, but got to this other property in Costa Rica, and I was like up one morning on my balcony. It was 6 o'clock, and I was having a coffee, and I was watching people out in the paddock riding, and I went, oh,
Uh-oh.
that looks like a lot of fun. So once again, I said to my friend Gary, I said, is there a horse available that I could ride? I'm not buying a horse, but is there a horse available that I could ride? And he went, he said 3 names of 3 different horses. And I went, that one, the third one. It was just something about his name. And he said, okay, well, what you need to know is that's my horse. And he's a cheeky boy. He's not very well behaved, and he doesn't listen very well. And I said, do you think I'm up to it, horsemanship wise? And he went, yeah, I think you are. I think he'll push your level. I think he'll push your skills. And you might want to do a couple lessons with Cody, one of the horse guys there, but I think you can do it. And again, I got on him, and he was this sweetheart for me. And I rode past Gary, and Gary came out of his apartment and onto his balcony, and he was like, how is he that well behaved for you? This cheeky boy, this misbehaved, naughty, cheeky boy or horse listens to you, loves you, does what you ask him, but he never did that from you. He was obviously your horse for the get-go. So I went, all right, what the heck? And I bought him. Now he's mine.
Nice. And what's his name again? Remind me.
Salaje, which is a Spanish word. And I've heard a few different people tell me their interpretation of the translation, but it means like a swift breeze.
Wow.
Mm.
And he's so amazing. We'll find some photos of you on him and post, I don't know, in the show notes or somewhere. But this horse, like the moment you're on him, he has this like presence, and the way he stands where it's like undeniable, this like connection or whatever that the two of you have, which is so phenomenal to see, and to like perceive that story where it's like you're like no, and then you're like and then it's like shit.
Yeah.
And that horse, you know, like how they pull us in, they're like you.
Well, it's kind of like the dating world. How many people do you know that have been like burned when it comes to relationships, and they go, that's it, I'm done, I ain't doing this again, I'm not getting back out there. And that's when somebody comes along that makes them go, oh, actually, you're pretty cool, I really like you, this could be fun.
So what is that? Like, what is it where, you know, we get to that point where we're like, no, and then it's like the universe or something is like, well, hang on.
I think that's when we give up need. Like,
yeah,
you know, I don't know how we're getting onto the subject of dating when the topic is horses, but when you stop looking
Yeah.
You go, no, I'm not doing this. You're not going, okay, I have to find it. I have to find it. Where's the one? You're like, I'm good on my own. I don't need anyone. I don't need anything. And that's when, boom,
Yeah. Yeah.
someone or something shows up that is like, hey, because you don't need me, you can actually have me.
Yeah. And this is what I love about horses so much, because this is relevant in everything. Like relationships is such a good way to like tie it in, because it's very clear to people. But even like at the moment, I'm in the process of possibly looking to buy a house or property. And like, you know, you sort of get caught up in this, like now it's time, so I must choose, and now I need to find the right house, and it needs to be perfect, and then all of a sudden it's like, if I just let go of everything and just ask a question for the universe to show me what that looks like, or whenever the timing is right for whatever that thing is to show up. I love this conversation about when you let go of need, it's almost like the possibilities actually have a chance to come and play and begin.
Yeah,
Very cool.
totally.
Yeah.
And horses will show you that in such an amazing way, because
Yeah.
they've got no need in their world. Like, it's weird. It's like that emotional need is,
Yeah.
it's only people that do that, where we
Yeah.
think that we lack
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
Horses and animals will just, they function from, this is what I require right now. I require water, I require food, I require rest. And they tell you pretty clearly, but there's never this like sense of I'm not enough without something.
Yeah.
That
Totally.
being said, I can sense the excitement in my horse's world when I walk near the paddock or the
Yeah.
stalls where he's being held. And I do quite often have a treat for him, but I can sense his ears prick up and his head turn, and he's to be like, "Hey, you're here!" Like, there is a sense of like, "Oh, that's awesome!" in in
Yeah.
his in his head, in his world of like me being there for him. But it's so different. Like, what if we all functioned more like horses and less like people?
Yeah. And the joy factor, I think like what you described then for me is they exist in this place of like peace and relaxation. And then when they're out of that, sometimes it's not joy. Well, maybe even when they're running from predators, they're having a lot of fun while they run and escape danger or whatever. But most of the time when they come out of that state of like eating or sleeping, relaxing, conserving energy, they go into this space of joy. And that's what I've seen in them, where their body, and, I've ridden my horse where he's like, it almost feels like you're floating off the saddle, because their body is so full, like every molecule is moving, moving, moving. And it's like their whole body becomes like this vibrating joy bomb. Like, yeah.
I remember going on a ride with you. It was just you and me and Cody, the horseman there who
Yeah.
was giving us a lesson, right? Right. And we were out riding, and it started to rain. And Costa Rica, especially the area where we were in a rainforest, it rains a lot, and it rains hard and heavy. And as the rain started to pick up, me and my horse were both going like, I'm not really that into this. But you and your horse were like, this is awesome, let's go. And you had that joy you're describing, and we're taking off. And my horse, as soon as I gave him permission to turn around, and even though we were not exactly near the stalls, he could tell that I was saying, okay, we can go home now. He was like, yes, thank God, I don't like being in the rain, let's get out of here. And
Yeah.
that's what gave him that sense of joy you're talking about. It's like, cool.
Yeah.
He was willing to
Yeah.
to do it. He was willing to walk in the rain and go for this ride in the rain. But for me, if that's what I told him we were doing, but as soon as I gave him permission that now we're heading home, fuck, he was happy.
Yeah. And like a little bit about that as well, where like, what have you found in your experience since having horses in that level of communication with them? Obviously, they're nonverbal. They don't, talk to us. They don't tell us what's going on. But that energy where you can almost have this, like awareness of what the other creature, him to you, you to him, requires in that moment. And how have you found that's shown up for you?
Well, I think I heard you say once, and you've probably talked about it on this podcast, horses are so sensitive, and they can hear your heartbeat. I think you've said from like 20 or 30 meters away. So if you have an elevated level of stress or apprehension or something's going on, your horse knows. They are so much more aware, like spherically, of all the space around them than anything I've ever encountered. I mean, people out there who have dogs and cats, yeah, they have this sense too, but it's different when you're getting on the animal and you have this connection and you're making choices with the animal of like where you're going and what speed you're going and all of that stuff. And there are schools of thought when riding of like being dominant and hitting the horse or hitting it with spurs to discipline it and make it listen to you and make it follow your order. But there is a possibility that I've discovered where you can communicate with it, as you said, in such a gentle, nonverbal, and subtle way that is so much more rewarding. Because you end up with this animal that you have this relationship with where there's nothing between you. Like there's just, you guys have this like, you can remember in the movie Avatar when the blue guys are getting on the beast and they have their long braid of hair and it connects to the other animal and there's this like back and forth. That's like this the sci-fi movie version where they show you one way that could be possible in fantasy, but in reality, you can have that with a horse in the coolest way where it almost makes me want to cry, where it knows what you're asking of it and it wants to do it with you, not for you.
Yeah. And it's like they don't have barriers. Like, when you're with a person, and that's kind of like almost like our dream scenario when we're with people as well, like to have that level of just like, it's almost like this energetic dance where you sort of are aware of what they require. They're aware of what you require. You can ask with subtlety. There's like this gentle flow. But with people, you tend to meet each other at like whatever, your limitations, your barriers, your judgments, and whatever that is. And horses just don't even like, they're like, hey, if you've got something going on, you've got something going on, and I'll do my best to like have that in my awareness. But really for them, it's like, I'm here. There's no such thing as time for me. I don't know what time is, except when it's getting close to dinner time, or there's no judgment in my world. There's no barriers to anything. It's just like this open space.
Yeah. That being said, I mean, what we're saying, I totally agree with, but I have met horses that have been mistreated where they don't have that. You have to work a lot harder to get there with them because they've learned to mistrust, or they've learned that they have been broken in a weird way or been mistreated in such a way that you have to like get them back to that reality of theirs where they don't have any barriers and they totally are willing to be there with you, because not everyone is that awesome with animals.
Totally. Yeah. And even my two horses here in Australia, like all the time you perceive, because, Ollie, my boy, was 7 when I got him, and then Willow was like 10 when we got her. So that's like a good chunk of their lives that other people have had influence over them. Like they're the ones like, that actually broke them in, turned them from horses that were just, semi-wild or not used to people into being ridden. And like people have a bunch of different ways to do that as well, to break a horse in, to break it to saddle, to back them, or whatever the terminology that people use is. And some of it's very gentle. These days people do tend to take a more gentle approach, but sometimes it's really harsh for the horse as well, what they go through to actually be willing to accept a rider on their back. So for sure, like also you perceive that straight away in them. But I think when you're willing to kind of have this space with them that we've been talking about, you almost realize straight away where they slip into that part of whatever, their history, their past, their whatever, subconscious or whatever it is. And it's almost like then you can present them the energy, like you said, like that, bringing them back to know, hey, you're your being, you're this horse, this magnificent creature, and you actually have like a different reality available.
Yeah. And I'm not trying to have power over you. I'd like us to do this together. And you do need to listen to me. You know, it's kind of like you have your dog Charlie, and I have Frankie. Why did I say Charlie?
I know,
Charlie's
it's Susie. It's Susie's dog. I know.
I've been around a lot of friends with dogs lately, and some of them are better trained than others. And a lot of them, interestingly enough, I've got like 3 or 4 friends right now here in Brisbane where I live who all have puppies of about in between 6 to 9 months old, all of them. So they're puppies still. They've got that goofy energy. And some of them are trained better than others. Like I was telling one guy the other day how you've trained Frankie to use her inside voice, and she'll bark really softly when you do that. And then I've got a friend who's got a Japanese Spitz who it's so loud, and he has done very little to like train that side of the animal. And there's you can train an animal with harshness and punishment and breed it into fear, or training, just like as you said, getting a horse ready to accept a rider can be a co-creation where you're like, hey dude, no, this isn't cool. That's not a behavior we're going to accept. But how you approach that with it allows the horse or the animal to be more of itself, or to fear you. Which fear is never that's never going to create what people want.
No, and it's not sustainable, especially with a horse like of that size. It's going to get to a time where the horse either is so scared that it flips out and kills itself or kills you or does something stupid, or they just shut down. They go into this internal space where they just become, this robot on legs where, and, you see a lot of horses in top performance where they're basically just dead in the eyes. They're doing everything perfectly, but they've gone into such this space inside themselves because they're like, well, I'm never given an opportunity to actually express myself or be me. And it's such a different energy. And I mean, I love this conversation because it's really talking to acknowledging the being of something, whether it's a dog or a person or a horse, acknowledging the energy of that being and because they're all different too. Like a horse, the way you treat one horse to the next one, like my 2 here that live together 24/7, I'm with them mostly every day. They're very different. The way everything you are with them energetically is so different from one another. It's truly phenomenal how different they are.
That's so cool. I was reading an article, I think it was a National Geographic article yesterday, the day before, I can never remember. I read so much. But it was saying how elephants have names for each other.
Yeah, wow.
And I can't remember how exactly they'd come to this, but they spent years monitoring these packs of elephants, and the sounds that they'd make and the calls that they'd made to each other indicated that they had names for one another.
Wow.
And it just like it's sort of like ridiculous. Like we as people have these personalities and these names and these like intricate individualized psychologies, right? And we assume that a horse is a horse and a dog is a dog and a duck is a duck. But in actual fact, like you said, we've all had pets and they're all so different. They all really do have their own quirks and personalities. And some of that has been imposed by how they have been treated. And some of that is just them. Like my horse, Salahe, he was Gary's horse. But he never behaved for Gary. He didn't like him. As soon as I got on him, he went,
yep, my guy.
You're my guy. Let's do this.
Yeah. It's truly an ever like an ever changing and moving journey too, like the things that we've discovered, because, and I talk about this a lot on the podcast as well, but we've worked with horses for like ever since they became in the form that they are now, and we inhabited the earth with them at the same time. So tens of thousands of years we've been with these animals, as long as we've been around, I guess, and in the form we're in, we've used them and we've been in partnership with them in all of these different ways. But I feel like now there's still so much to discover. Like, it's like we've had all this time with them and all of this has been discovered, but truly what else is there? Like, what else is available and what else is possible for us to learn from them and for them to learn from us? And like, we've built cities, we've won wars, we've conquered nations. Like, the world, we would not be where we are. The world would not be where it is without this partnership. So I wonder also, like, what next? Like, what else is possible with this thing that we've created so far? And that's what I love. Conscious Horse, Conscious Rider is also a specialty of access consciousness. And we've, Gary Douglas developed this class where you can go and actually be facilitated by horses. Like, you can do an intro, a 1 day, a 2 day class, and you actually get to work with these animals on a bunch of different things. And I'm like, there's no one else in the world that looks at horsemanship quite the same way. Like, it definitely factors in a lot of traditional horsemanship, English style, natural horsemanship, all that sort of stuff. But there's like this whole new book being written on the possibility with horses that I just find so exciting. Do you want to tell us briefly, have you ever attended a Conscious Horse, Conscious Rider class? Do you remember anything from?
No, I have not. But in my adult life, I know that's something that needs to be changed. But in my adult life, the first time I actually got on a horse was in a ring with Gary Douglas teaching me in front of an audience. And
Wow.
I was an absolute, like I said, before that, all I'd really done was like a couple trail horses as a really young kid on like school excursions. But then as an adult, getting on a horse in front of an audience, being like riding around a ring with Gary teaching me that was my first real experience of it. And he, I think, introduced a lot of some of the principles of Conscious Horse, Conscious Rider while he did it, but that was it.
Cool. Well, I mean, I invite you and everyone else listening to the podcast as well, whether you've been to one of these classes or not. There's a bunch of facilitators around the world doing classes all over. And it's so cool because, and I mean, what I sort of guess my target is with these podcasts is obviously to bring the joy of horses to the world, to hear people's stories, my guests, and to know how horses have impacted their lives. But also for me, like, the way that they, like, it's like when I'm not around them, everything that they show me, I have so present in my world in everyday life. So when I'm like dealing with people, or, we talked about the force thing and all that, when I'm dealing with people that I work with, or, people that are doing things for you, employees, for lack of a better word, like people that work on your team and stuff like that. Like, I just see how they can show us so much more around like leadership and communication and this leading energy through relaxation. That is really also my target with these podcasts, is to really encourage and almost like challenge people to get around horses, to allow them in to influence and contribute to their whole lives, not just while they're with them.
Yeah.
Yay. And
thank you for saying that, because do you know how many people, when they find out I've got a horse in Costa Rica, they're like, what? How often do you get to see him? And I'm like, a couple times a year, but in actual fact, he's a contribution to me every day. I think about him. I've got photos of him. When you have something like that in your life, it's almost like when you have a relationship with someone or anything that you care about, having it and it being there is the contribution. It's not necessarily being directly in its physical presence that adds what it adds.
Yeah. Thank you so much, because that's really another huge thing. And, right now you can tap into your horse in Costa Rica energetically, and it's like, you're there. He's there.
Yep.
You're there. It's like
Yep.
this undeniable. And that's another thing, because, you know, we travel a lot, and I have a dog and I have horses here and horses in Costa Rica. And, you know, I have a partner and family. Like, we all have relationships of varying kinds with varying people and things. But it's like also this space of like where, you know, we touched on need, like the need of having something around you. It's not real. It's like you can be connected to everyone and everything, no matter where you are in the world, and continue to contribute to them and allow them to contribute to you without needing to be physically in their space, which I think is like such another huge lesson that has come into my world as well, where it stretches you. It makes you be bigger and more you, because it's like, it doesn't matter where I am. I want to be connected to everyone and everything, especially the things I care about. So
yeah, totally.
Thank
You're
you
making
so
me
much.
miss it.
I know. I often do that. People come on and they're like, damn, now I want to see my horse. But
Yeah,
it won't be long. We'll be over there in September. Yeah. Are you
exactly.
coming? Yeah. So it won't be long. So thank you, Chris. Thank you for being on my podcast. Thank you for bringing more joy of horses to the world and allowing us to see into your world and what horses have brought you. So
Thank you, my dear. It's always a pleasure.
And we'll post some notes about where you can hear about more of what Chris is doing, because he's fucking awesome, guys. Like, if you haven't already, please listen to Chris's podcast. Find a class to do with him. The Right Voice for You classes are amazing. It's nothing like what you think it is. Like Conscious Horse. Like, you think, oh, what am I going to go and learn how to ride a horse or be around horses? No. And just like Right Voice for You, it's about so much. So yes, my strong urge is to also get and see some of what this amazing man is up to in the world. Mwah, mwah, mwah. Thank you, everyone. See you next time.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.